What's the greatest gift a parent can give their child?
The gift of understanding their emotions and understanding how to self-affirm. Because when we can actually know what our emotions even are, and what I mean by that is that we have emotions and that they're body-centered, right? Like that we have a really concrete understanding of the full spectrum of our emotions and how they can manifest in our bodies. And then how we can actually do something to validate ourselves through the emotional process. I think that's a beautiful gift that parents can give their children. And when parents do that for themselves and their children, it's a beautiful generational gift.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So the first thing I'm hearing you say is kind of the ways to start healing is to first do an assessment of the stories and the memories that hurt you and see how the body reacts or responds.
Right.
What would be the next step after that? We notice a tightness in our stomach, a clenching in our throat, a pain in our chest. What would be the next step to starting that healing process?
Step 2 is relaxation. Step 2 is actually going into any kind of practice you choose, right? But it can be breath work, it can be meditation, it can be Tai Chi, it can be yoga, it can be so many that can actually help your body to release some of that tension.
Interesting.
And so what we're doing in that very moment is that we're, of course, recognizing that there's a pain that has been there, that has been emotional, that has now a physical manifestation, and that we're also integrating a body relaxation practice to help release that tension, help absolve that tension from the body.
If we never release it, what happens?
It becomes disease.
Wow. So emotional memories turn into physical pain and eventually disease in some way.
Many of the metabolic conditions that we know about, diabetes, for example, cardiac conditions, a lot of those can be mapped back to stressors in life. And there's a lot of studies that have been done around even autoimmune conditions being very deeply connected to stressors and to trauma. And more recently, there's some studies that also have some correlates to certain cancers. So when we start thinking about what the body is telling us, the body, when it's in that state of disease, it's telling us, I don't feel well because I'm not being taken care of emotionally. And that, it is usually like the clue for us to say, oh, I need to slow down, when we needed to slow down probably 15, 20 years ago.
Right. Mm-hmm. So once we, recall the memories and I guess really reflect on where we're feeling this pain or reaction in our bodies, the third thing I'm hearing you say is to relax through some type of therapeutic process, breath work, meditation, yoga, some type of relaxation process to release it, right?
Mm-hmm.
What would be the next thing? Because a lot of times most people just numb or disassociate the pain, right? We don't truly feel the pain because it's too painful. And so we'll find ways to numb, distract, disassociate, block the memories, to not feel that pain. And that can be just as harmful, right? Just to numb, block, or disassociate.
It can. They're protective factors. They're ways that we protect ourselves from the pain that we truly feel. And especially the depths of our pain. Some of us just don't want to understand how deeply hurt we have been.
How wrong we've been,
how
unfair, unjust, hurtful these things are.
Yeah. And like in order to self-preserve, in order to make it through another day, the mind and the body, they're just brilliant, like machines. They have mechanized a way to actually protect us from ourselves.
Wow.
And so they basically structured all these coping mechanisms that, albeit harmful or maladaptive or not helpful or not connecting when we're talking about relationships, right? They can, still help keep you safe for another day. But the alternative to that is to then learn coping skills that actually can be adaptive, connecting. And that can actually be the better recipe for not only your ability to stay within healthy relationships with other people, but also for you to experience the type of sustainable and long-term mental and physical wellness.
What's the next step after that? Once we start applying some of these self-therapeutic experiences, it might be 10 minutes of breath work or some type of release. How do we get to a place of truly healing that wound or that memory? You know, and how long does it take of us doing this over and over again? Do we eventually need to process in other ways through talk therapy or more intensified therapies? What's the solution to absolute healing? And is that even a thing?
Well, there isn't really a 100%, type of healing that truly exists. I mean, I think that anything that leans in the direction of perfectionism is a myth, including healing, right? However, there are ways in which we can live a life that is filled with ease and peace more often than not. And a life in which if triggers were ever to present themselves, that they would be just subtle and tolerable, and that we can have the actual tools, the sense of empowerment and agency over our own bodies and minds to actually release that process and move into the next thing that life has for us, rather than being stuck and frozen, which is what tends to happen with trauma.
Sure.
But the next step really is, the way that I work is that I integrate a lot of these nervous system restoration practices for a long period of time with folks. And I've done it myself and with my family and with kind of everyone in the book. But this actually is the lengthier part of the work, the actual grounding.
This can take months or years. It can take months. Right? Yeah.
It can. And, sometimes I actually like to give it a bit of context, like for people who feel like, well, let's say, that I want to do this work, but how much am I going to have to do in order to really...
Might be a lot. It might be a lot. I
mean, and that's okay.
And it might feel exhausting, and it might feel overwhelming, and it might feel emotional, and it might feel, like it's all consuming at times.
Yeah, all of the above.
Yeah.
And that's actually, I would even go as far as saying maybe not might, but it will, right?
Yeah. That's for a period of time.
Yeah, for a period of time, and it is survivable. And if you have the tools to actually help you to settle once things feel like they're getting really heavy, then it's going to make the experience more tolerable.
Right.
And you're not going to feel like you're thrown into the abyss of your deepest, darkest emotions and have no way out. You're like in a black hole.
Yeah. And there's this, I don't know who's originally said this type of quote or this kind of phrase, but you'll hear people say, what happened to you is not your fault, but it is your responsibility to overcome it, to heal it, to process it, to realize what it was and not let it consume your life.
Yes.
And I think what you mentioned about higher self, learning about our nervous systems so we can work with it to become our best, highest self as most often as possible, right? Which means having peace and harmony inside of us as frequent as possible, because that is our true nature, peace and harmony. And I think that's what it comes down to. What are you willing to do to create peace and harmony, to actualize your highest self as frequently as you can? It's not about perfection. You're not going to be this Zen person all the time, but that's a beautiful life, living in peace and harmony. Living in suffering and pain and agony and numbing yourself is not a beautiful life. It's a survival mechanism which is useful for a period of time, but not for all of time. And so we just got to be aware of that.
Yeah.
And it's going to take doing some intense, painful work for a period of time for hopefully a lifetime of freedom afterwards.
Exactly. Even if the parent can't see it, there's a lot happening internally in that little body that's already their heart rate is increasing, their pupils are becoming dilated. They're probably sweating, there's a lot happening because they're ready for battle, basically, right?